to another session of VAC Tech Talk. What we're doing here today is we're going to present ARP fasteners. Everybody knows ARP, but we're going to do some technical, I guess, information. Maybe some of it is advice, some of it, most of it's probably known, but I think there's probably a few things that we can share that may not be known. What we'll do today is we'll start with the rod bolts. What we're going to show, these are just some S65 pistons and rods, and the reason we're choosing these is because we do sell ARP 2000 bolts for them, and then we also sell the Custom Age bolts for those as well. We have had over the years questions about why use ARP, and if we use ARP, are we going to affect the bore shape on the rod? Is that going to be a problem for us? Oh, we just want to use factory bolts. So what we've done here is we did do a test. We've taken these rods. These rods are what's known as cracked cap technology here, and basically if you look really close you'll see that they're not machined. The cap is in fact marked, and then they crack it, and then after you go to assemble, the grain from the crack from the material will locate everything perfectly every time. So that's kind of why they use that. The downside of this is that you can't recondition the rod, so if you end up with a deformed big end, you can't simply resize, whereas on the previous designs or on the standard design where everything's flat, we grind the cap, we grind the rod on this side, basically we shrink it, make it look more oval, and then hone it back to size to get our perfect size. With cracked cap rods you cannot do that. Alright, now onto the bolts. With the bolts, the factory bolts are...
That's on the factory bolt.
The factory bolts are basically designed for one-time use. What we're showing here is you got the ARPs, you got the custom aged, okay? So the custom aged is, they call it custom age 625 plus. And then the ARP 2000 is your standard, what we consider the standard material. I believe on maybe in our applications we just reference it as a -S sometimes on our part numbers, and then the custom age is suffixed with a -CA or CA plus. So the major difference is the material of the fasteners. The standard ARP 2000s are torqued to 45 foot-pounds, and the custom age get torqued to 60. When you're using the factory fasteners, they're pretty much one-time use. These are reusable. What we're going to show is that on these bolts, and you cannot do it with this application, if you have a bolt like this is smooth, you'll get some bolts that are dimpled. The dimpled version is simply for being able to use a stretch gauge on it. You cannot use a stretch gauge on a factory rod anyway, because this side is not open. On aftermarket rods it is open and you can get your stretch gauge on. So on factory rods you can't use a stretch gauge. You'd have to simply use the torque method and not the stretch method. So what Paulie did here is he conducted a test for us. He took these connecting rods, which are factory, measured it, had his size, switched over to ARP 2000, and then also switched out to the custom age. The ARP 2000 torqued to 45 foot-pounds, did not deform the bore. The custom age torqued to 60 foot-pounds, did not deform the bore. So for those who have asked in the past, will the rod big end sizing change if we use aftermarket fasteners, or if we're using these ARP fasteners? The question is, regardless of which version you use, ARP 2000 or custom age, the bore dimensions did not change, the shape did not change. So you would be fine dimensionally. If you're installing and replacing rod bolts in the car, you're going to be perfectly fine doing so.
That's providing that the bore on the rod is round to begin with.
Yes. Assuming that your connecting rod is a good connecting rod
They
and it's
should be
round.
checked anyway.
But they can't check them in the car. This is for in-car
unfortunate.
installation. You know, that's the problem, right?
Yeah.
But in many cases, if they're doing just a bearing replacement and rod bolt replacement, I think it would be safe to say that there's been tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of these jobs performed globally. Not all, obviously, using just VAC product, but
Yeah,
globally.
When I checked the rod, a couple of those rods that we checked with the bolts, weren't the rod bore was bigger than what it was supposed to be.
Yeah.
And it was out of round quite a bit, even with the factory bolts, and it didn't make a difference putting the ARPs in there. So.
Well, this is part of the problem. This is when you're building a motor, you always consider just changing these connecting rods. You know, and this is the same thing when the S54 first came out.
Yeah.
We were probably one of the first to build those motors. We built them, you know, for some Grand Am applications back in the day,
Right.
and we discovered quickly that the big end will deform. And so...
Well, they were deformed with the factory bolts.
Yeah,
It was-
absolutely.
It was just the way they made them, went out of round.
Yep. So, and you can't recondition them, and then you would go, if you're doing a proper build, you would go to aftermarket rods. All right, I guess we'll move on to, you know, head stud technology. Same thing here in head stud technology. There's applications where you have ARP 2000, and you have the Custom Age 625. This particular kit is the kit that we're releasing now. ARP just finished doing these for us, and this is an S63 kit. Here's an S63 block with one bank with the studs in them. So the S63, and most of these studs these days, they're designed, we're going to show you the tip here, they're designed with a little bit of a, call it a bullet tip. This is intended to go past the threads, because when the factory machines the blocks, that you can't cut a thread all the way to the bottom. So when the threads stop, this tip can still go past the thread into the drilled section and bottom out inside the bore. The other end is hex broach. This is a 4mm hex broach here. This is not intended for torquing the studs into place. This is actually to just help you install and remove. No need to torque studs in place. As soon as it bottoms out, you stop. All right, now to the different materials again. This is the best, strongest, most expensive material. This is the ARP 2000, which is basically, if you want to call it, your entry level material. This is capable of doing most jobs out there, to be honest with you. There are some applications where there's an L19 that's used. What we're going to do with L19, we're going to talk about that a little bit. We're going to show you the mystery package over here. The reason why this is done this way is the material of the L19 should not be handled by hand. If you ever have to service and wash them, you can service and wash them, but make sure they're thoroughly dried and then also lubed up quickly again. The reason you have to treat L19 that way is if there is any corrosion that starts on the surface, it will actually penetrate the material and go into the material, and it'll end up causing hydrogen embrittlement. There's a fancy word for you. And basically what that means to you is most likely the fastener will end up potentially failing. And we have had people sometimes say, oh, my connecting rod broke right in the middle, you know, and I was using an L19. Well, chances are that's what happened. So do not handle L19 with bare hands. Make sure that if they're washed, they're thoroughly dried, and then quickly lubricate it to keep them in good condition. The fasteners are all reusable. So what we did notice today, you know, ARP is always coming out with some cool stuff. If you take a look here at these washers, it almost looks like there's a diamond plate finish on those. So, you know, typically you look at washers, they're ground on both sides, they're nice and smooth. On this particular setup here, we're gonna flip one. One side is nice and smooth, and that other side has the texture. The intention here is that when you take one of these and you're installing it, make believe we have a cylinder head here, we're gonna put this face down onto the head. And then we're gonna have a nut. So you have smooth to smooth. Remember, moly lube, you have to use your ARP lube when you're doing this. So as you tighten, the intention is that the nut can spin on the washer, but the washer, because it's textured, will start to dig into the cylinder head and prevent the washer from spinning. What that's going to do, that's going to give you a much more consistent torque across the board at all positions. Now, Paulie's installed plenty of these, and I'm not sure, have you seen this washer used with any other application that you've installed? And you've done a lot of them.
No, I haven't seen that yet.
Yeah, so this is pretty cool.
That's
this is
something new that ARP come out with,
yeah,
which makes a lot of sense.
Yep, we like it. So this is definitely a nice improvement to their kits. I mean, I'm not sure what else we can add that's of big value with you know without taking more and more of your time, but we can say that the majority of the fasteners that are sold, the most affordable fasteners tend to be the ARP 2000. They are actually, like I said, they are good for quite a fair amount of power level. When you start to get into heavy boost conditions, then you probably need to consider different material, but the ARP 2000 should get a fair amount done for you. How do I quantify it? I mean, I don't know if I put a horsepower per cylinder, but that's not going to be consistent because it's going to depend on the fastener diameter, the fastener design, and so forth. So there's a lot that goes into it. What I can say is that most BMW, most actually other manufacturers that we're seeing, the common size these days, especially on the European vehicles, tends to be an M11, 11 millimeter is more common. The earlier engines were using 10s. Some applications like the N54, N55 were using 9 millimeter on the ends and 11 millimeter in the center. I guess, you know, when you're trying to support an adjacent on both sides of the cylinder, you know, they want the 11 because it's supporting both. And then when you're only supporting one end, you can be in 9 millimeter. It is not uncommon to drill and tap the ends on the 9 millimeter applications and upgrade them to 11s. What else can I share? You know, everybody knows that I just like to do this stuff off of the top of my head. It's never rehearsed. If we show you around, there's not reading this anywhere. I'm just good at making stuff up. No, just kidding. This is all real good info. It's real info. We share our knowledge, we share our experiences, and some of you may have heard this before, but I think, you know, sometimes you got to judge a book by the cover. When we look at the cover here, and you look at the cover here, there's a lot of experience in these books. So, as usual, look, you know, we welcome feedback. If there's any questions, if there's any comments you'd like to share, if you have experiences that differ from our experiences, by all means share. We have not seen everything under the sun, but probably close to it. So we look forward to seeing you guys and catching up soon. Thanks again, and see you next time.